Food, whether local or not, takes a few steps to get from the farm to your plate. The first thing that might pop into your mind with local food is that it traveled fewer miles to get to you. This is true, but when looking at the food production process, transportation makes up only 11% of greenhouse gas emissions. The type of transportation does affect the amount of emissions. For example, trains are 10 times more efficient than trucks. Think about it. A box of strawberries that traveled 1,000 miles by train will use almost the same amount of fuel as a box that was trucked from 100 miles away. So then where does the other 89% of greenhouse gas emissions come from? A majority of those emissions, roughly 2/3, come from the actual production of food. When considering the production of local produce, you have to keep in mind that the produce that you want is in season. Produce that is grown in season for the local environment uses less energy and water than when you have to change the environment, like through the use of greenhouses. Greenhouses use more water and energy in general, which increases their environmental impact. When produce is grown out of season, especially in colder regions, greenhouses also need to be heated. This is one of the largest contributions to greenhouse gas emissions. For example, to grow cucumbers in the snowy regions of Switzerland, heated greenhouses emit 10 times the amount of greenhouse gases when compared to non-heated greenhouses, such as those in the warm hills of Spain. So, the more that you have to manipulate an environment to grow certain produce, the more resources you have to use. The remaining quarter of greenhouse gas emissions comes from food waste, and food waste comes in a few forms. A lot comes from overproduction on farms. When the market isn't right, some farms decide not to harvest some of their crops. Another portion comes from culling, or getting rid of edible crops because they don't meet quality or appearance standards. Refrigeration malfunctions or delays in shipment of produce can also result in food going bad sooner. In 2005 and 2006, supermarkets in the U.S. lost almost 11.4% of their fruit and 9.7% of their vegetables. Personal choices, such as not using all the food you buy or how you dispose of your food waste, also has a substantial impact. So, waste partially comes from the practices of farms, but also from the consumer's choices. But, taking a step back and looking at all this information, is eating locally really more sustainable, even if there's not a huge difference between greenhouse gas emissions of local produce and non-local large-scale farming? Eating sustainably is complex and depends on a lot of factors, but getting food from smaller local farms is a step in the right direction. Small farms use a method called intercropping. This means that farmers use the space between crops for other crops. Large farms are mostly monocultures. This means that they have a large yield of one crop, but there is still a lot of unused space between the crops. Remember how a large part of waste comes from overproduction? Well, this tends to happen less on small farms when the land is used more efficiently. And because small farms use a larger amount of different crops, they can also maintain a greater amount of diverse ecosystems, which only enhances the biodiversity of the land. Small farms also produce more than just food. By buying from local farms, you are keeping small, family-owned farms in business, and people who own and work on small farms tend to have a personal connection to the land that they cultivate, which helps ensure that the food will be respected and used sustainably. Buying locally also means supporting the economic stability, culture, and traditions of many farming towns in the U.S. And it is not just small-town farmers that agree with all of these benefits. It's agricultural researchers from around the world, the World Bank, and many others. So, this is a lot of information and values. Social issues definitely combine with the problem of emission that makes eating locally a very human question. In this video, we didn't answer the question of nutrition, or workers' rights, or even access to local food. Also, along with where you get your food, what you eat also makes a difference. The production and consumption of meat actually contributes more to the production of greenhouse gases than that of fruits and vegetables. These are all questions to ask yourself and consider when purchasing food. But, if you have the choice and means to buy from small local farms, you can be sure that you are taking a step towards eating sustainably.